Order. The National Assembly is now in session, and it is my pleasure to welcome a new member this afternoon, Janet Howarth, who is the new Conservative member for the North Wales region. Very pleased to see you here, and we look forward to your contributions here in the Chamber and beyond. I would now like to invite you to say a few words.
Thank you. As this is my first opportunity to speak in the Chamber, I would like to extend my thanks to the Assembly staff and fellow members who are all helping me to settle in. You are. I'm very appreciative. My predecessor, Antoinette Sambach MP, do like saying that, is very much in my thoughts as I stand here picking up the baton she has passed to me. I aim to continue Antoinette's good work on behalf of the people of North Wales. The residents of Edinburgh are very fortunate to have her as their Member of Parliament. Foremost in my thoughts, of course, is the Shadow Environmental and Sustainability Brief that has passed to me. It seems to me we can't have one without the other. They are the bedrock of the future of Wales. This is also an exciting time to be joining the Welsh Assembly, a time of change. Cicero once described politics as history on the wing. There is the opportunity in this chamber to make history. An education service that offers equality of opportunity, and a National Health Service free at the point of need. These two services are admired across the world, and it is important we celebrate their successes. But we must not shy away from highlighting where they are failing. I will not be afraid to stand up for the concerns of my constituents in North Wales. But I would like to finish on a lighter note. Colleagues, I know that you are all avid watchers of the Welsh news. And I know you would have seen the feature on the Girl Guides, where the girls were being asked to think about the opportunities for women to become more involved in politics. I was once a Girl Guide, and if any of those girls are watching today, I would just like to say to them, come on in, you can do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 1, questions to the First Minister. Question 1, Aled Roberts.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. What steps is the Welsh Government taking to monitor the response of Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board to pressures on emergency services in North Wales?
Well, Welsh Government works with the health boards, including the Betsy Cadwaladr Board, of course, and we work with them on a daily basis to monitor pressures on the accident and emergency services and ambulance services.
Thank you for that response.
To refer to a number of reports that I've had the misfortune of reading over the past week as far as the performance of Betsy Cadwaladr is concerned, and had thought that we would have the opportunity to consider that in a statement this afternoon, although I understand that now that has been withdrawn. I would therefore ask you to outline what steps the Welsh Government has taken with regard to unannounced inspection reports at the Accident and Emergency Department at Wrexham Mailer in September and October, which led to an action plan being agreed by Betsy Cadwaladr in December 2014, an action plan which did not appear on the Health Inspectorate Wales website until my office requested a copy on the 28th of May. That included a review being undertaken at A&E in Wrexham, which identified that it was understaffed by 15.81 whole-time equivalents and had a budget deficit of £664,000. It also mentioned that that emergency department had not met any of the Welsh Government's emergency targets either during or after the review. I can see no discussion of that report subsequent to January 2014. So what have Health Inspectorate Wales and the Welsh Government done to ensure that Betsy has actually responded to that one particular report, if none other?
Yeah, we'll be very clear with Betsy that patient flow has to improve at the Milo Emergency Department. The Health Board itself has provided assurance that it will be focusing on the 4-hour target specifically over the coming months. And, of course, focus is being placed on actions to prevent patients being admitted to hospital where that's appropriate, including the use of a pharmacy pilot in the emergency department itself. There are other examples of what has happened since. New hospital directors have taken up post. There's been increased integration with social services for timely discharge, implementation of updated discharge policy to provide patients and carers with information on choice. There is a WAST Pathfinder project that's been put in place to show how to redirect triage category blue patients to alternative pathways, and outreach from the emergency department to care homes to maintain patients in their normal place of residence, other than having to come into hospital. That's specific to Ysbyty Glan-Clwyd, I should mention. We know that emergency services are an issue across the whole of the UK in terms of increasing demand, but nevertheless much has been done in the Mile in order to seek to improve the service.
Anne Jones.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. First Minister, following the critical report on the out-of-hours GP services, especially from Glan-Clwyd Hospital, I think at the time I raised the issue about the fact that there's many issues that people will turn up at A&E without having to, and part of that problem is the out-of-hours service not functioning as they correctly believe it should. The other problem, of course, is GPs not being able to get appointments, to get appointment to GP, and I remember at a time when somebody once said to me that they would wait until after 6 o'clock and turn up at the A&E. What's your government doing to ensure that we have that seamless transfer through for people to get those appointments so that they don't have to attend A&E?
Well, we have, of course, increased the percentage of surgeries that are open at least one evening a week. And the member will know, of course, our manifesto pledge with regard to that, and weekends. More difficult, of course, because GPs are private contractors. They technically don't work for the health service in that sense. And to an extent, they operate as independent contractors, those that are part of the independent contractor model. Now, in terms of diverting people away from A&E when they don't need to attend A&E, I know that Betsy Cadwallader have an active Choose Well campaign highlighted on their web page. They also host an All Wales 24-hour telephone advice line for mental health called Call Helpline, which offers both a listening and directional support service for those who are in need.
Darren Miller.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. First Minister, one critical part of our unscheduled care system, of course, is that GP out-of-hours service, but we know from the report which was published by the Betsy Cadwallader Health Board that there are some serious failings in the governance arrangements around that service, and as a result of those, 84% of the people who work within it feel that the service is not always safe, and that the information that's flowing back to the Welsh Government is that that service is failing on every measure for the people of North Wales. Given that it's being reported back to you on a weekly basis, what action is your government going to take to improve the situation in GP out-of-hours services in North Wales so that people can have confidence when they use them?
We expect the local health board, of course, to take cognizance of the report and to act upon it. It's important that where people feel that out-of-hours is not providing as it should, that the LHB takes such steps in order to ensure that it does. It's not always as easy as it sounds, because it does depend on the goodwill of GPs. And I say they don't work for the health service, but nevertheless, it is important that GPs feel supported when it comes to them wishing to work in out of hours. And I expect the LHB to take steps as quickly as possible to ensure the situation is as it should be.
Lle Griffith.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. One of the things that contributes to the pressures on the health service is the fact that there aren't enough beds in the system, and the beds are blocked within the system, and that there are then implications in terms of releasing people from accident and emergency units. Do you agree with me that the fact that we have lost so many community hospitals has contributed to that problem?
No, I don't believe that's true. Not at all. What's important is that we should ensure that there are means for people to go home when they can, and we must ensure, we've seen that the transfers of care have reduced in Wales recently, and that's something to be welcomed. But what is important, that people can return home as soon as possible. And of course, there's a great deal of treatment now that's available where people would have to go in overnight. Previously, they don't need to do so any longer. But what's important is that we work with the health boards to ensure that people can go home when they're ready to do so.
To Mark Isherwood.
How is the Welsh Government increasing the number of new homes built in Wales?
A number of measures help to buy Wales, the social housing grant programme, reforming the planning system, and a new housing finance grant.
Thank you. Well, how will the Welsh Government be responding to the two new reports completed by NLP planning for the house building industry in Wales, which confirmed the link between market supply and housing market affordability, but stated that Wales will need 11,660 new homes built a year, and that new house building in Wales is currently more than 50% down on what is needed, even excluding catch-up for those who have been waiting for the opportunity to form their own households and economic factors.
Well, recent figures show an increase of 31% in the number of new houses started in Wales during October to December of last year compared to the same quarter in 2013 to 14. The number of new dwellings completed also increased, up by 12% in the same quarter the previous year. We know that during 2013 to 14, the number of new houses started in Wales was up 9% on the previous year. And National House Building Council figures for 2014 as a whole show that new housing registrations in Wales were up by a third, which is the largest increase reported of any nation or region in the UK. So I don't recognise the figures that the members put forward as being representative of housing in Wales. And one thing we will not do, I can promise, is sell off social housing stock, as his party wants to do in England, will do in England, and wants to do in Wales. That is the equivalent of trying to fill up the bath with a plug out. So we will make sure that affordable housing is available in Wales, even as his party reduces the amount of affordable housing available in England.
Jenny Rathbone.
Well, people on average earnings in my constituency, where they've got 2 earners in the household, are unable to afford to buy a place. So I'm keen to find out what the government can offer in the way of either cooperative housing, self-build housing, or further council housing to enable people to be appropriately housed.
Well, of course, the member will know that councils have begun to build houses in Wales again after a break of many years. Money has been made available to help councils, of course, to refurbish homes, to bring them back into use. That's been successful across Wales. She asks specifically about cooperative housing. I know it's an issue that interests her particularly, and indeed the member for Swansea East is something that he has asked me about before. We are building a platform for cooperative housing to grow and to develop further in Wales, and with that in mind, we have provided nearly £2 million to support 3 cooperative housing pilot schemes in Cardiff, Newport and Carmarthen, and they will deliver between them around 100 additional affordable homes.
Lyndon Parrott.
First Minister, there's guidance within new social housing as to the percentage of homes that should be adaptable for the disabled, but there seems to be little recognition that people with different disabilities have very different needs as to what adaptable means. And for those with very significant mobility issues, something like an adapted bathroom is inadequate. They may need things like hoists, wider corridors, wider doorways, which can't be retrofitted into a standard home, and they may need houses which are built specifically to be structurally stronger. Could you look at introducing a target for the number of homes that should be significantly strengthened for those kind of significant adaptabilities?
The member makes a very good point, and that is the tendency sometimes to think of people as having a disability that is similar to all. I mean, there's a major difference between somebody who has mobility problems and somebody who has sight problems, for whom, for example, contrast is a major issue. If they go into a building and there's not enough contrast between the colours, it can be quite difficult for people to read more than anything else, and also, of course, to find their way around. I would expect local planning authorities and indeed social services departments to plan with regard to what the demand is in their own areas when planning applications for building sites come before them, and also, of course, that they understand what the nature of demand is for different disabilities within their own areas. And it's something I think that local authorities particularly are in a strong position in terms of being able to do.
Mike Hedges.
Does the First Minister agree with me that the total housing stock will not increase if housing associations are forced to sell properties at less than the cost of building them, putting their whole financial viability at stake?
Yes, I do. I mean, we know that in many parts of Wales, the social housing stock has diminished greatly over the past 30 years. I mean, Powys, I remember seeing examples 10 years ago in Powys where half the stock had gone. There are examples in Ceredigion I know of where flats that were previously council housing flats are now holiday homes, in effect. That's the way it's gone over the past 30 years. So yes, he is quite right. It is the equivalent of trying to fill up the bath with a plug out. We need to make sure that there is enough affordable housing available in Wales. That's what we intend to do, and we're not prepared to undermine that by selling off the stock that's just been built.
I now call the party leaders to question the First Minister. Leader of the Opposition, Andrew R.T. Davis.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. First Minister, last Thursday a damning report was brought forward over the levels of care at Tawelfan Ward at Ysbyty Glan Clwyd. Everyone would have been very disturbed by the findings of that report. I haven't heard what your views are on that report. I'd be very grateful to hear those views in response to my first question.
The report details appalling, shocking and unacceptable behaviour on the ward. I can well understand why the families are angry I think any one of us would be in the same circumstances. It is right to ask the question, what has been done since, because these, what happened in Tywel Van happened in 2013 mainly. The answer I give to him is this, that the independent report was commissioned. The LHB put their disciplinary processes on hold until the latest process in the report was made public. They will now continue with their disciplinary processes, and they must ensure that happens. In the meantime, spot checks have been introduced, of course, at Welsh hospitals in mental health units. Most of them have been inspected. The results of those spot checks show that whilst there are some issues in some of those units, we can have some assurance that there is nothing equivalent happening in mental health units across the rest of Wales. And those spot checks have been exceptionally important in providing us with that picture. That will not do anything to, I understand this full well, not do anything to resolve the anger of the families who are affected in these circumstances, and it is absolutely crucial that the apology given by the local health board is reflected in their future actions, and that lessons, very difficult and strong lessons, are learned by the LHB.
I'm very grateful for that very detailed answer that you gave me, First Minister. I am disappointed it took you 5 days to give that type of answer. On Thursday, when this report came out, I found out that you obviously believe Sepp Blatter should resign, but you didn't choose to offer your views on this damning report that was into the levels of care over a number of years. This wasn't a weekend, this wasn't a week, this wasn't a month. It was as a number of years that this situation had been allowed to develop within that ward, within that hospital. You are the First Minister of Wales. The buck stops with you. Absolutely. And ultimately, the parents, the families, and anyone who depends on this type of service look to you as First Minister and your government for a response and also efficiency in the way you run our health service. What assurances can you give the parents, the patients, and some of the nurses and the clinical staff who turned up and did their jobs, but regrettably, some of them were not doing their jobs and the managers turned a blind eye?
Well, first of all, I have to say to the Leader of the Opposition, I do wish he wouldn't trivialise what is an important issue. I'm not prepared to express a view on Twitter on an important issue such as this. It's absolutely right that these views are expressed on the floor of the National Assembly. We will have a debate tomorrow, I anticipate, on this. And it's absolutely right that those issues should be dealt with in that way and not in social media. He asks a question, and I give him the answer in terms of what the families can expect. The families can expect there to be action by the local health board. The families can expect us as a government, and I say this publicly, that the local health board will take disciplinary action against those who are responsible. It simply is not good enough simply to say, well, lessons have been learned, but nobody bears responsibility within the LHB. I don't think that would be a credible position for the LHB to be in, and I don't think the families would accept that for any minute.
You are quite right to lambaste me for trivialising it about social media. But the reason I use social media was because that is the only source of comment that I could find from you on that particular day. This report was launched on Thursday. One would expect the most senior politician with ultimate responsibility here in Wales to offer a view on what has been a collapse in care and the duty of care for some of our most vulnerable people within the health service. Now, what people will want is action, and hopefully we will have the debate tomorrow and we'll be able to hear from the Health Minister what direct action the Welsh Government are going to take. But what confidence can you give people today that there aren't similar episodes of care going on within the rest of the NHS? You will know that I have called for an inquiry across the NHS to look in all aspects of care, the length and breadth of Wales. So if you will not grant that inquiry, what assurances can you give that people can have that this will not be repeated in 6, 12 or 18 months' time? I think that is a very fair question.
Well, leaving aside the fact there's no case for any kind of public inquiry, that would take about 2 years to report back. It's money in the pockets of lawyers. I would rather put that money into hospitals. And a public inquiry, which is what he's been asking for, does take years. Much better to have straight away spot checks, unannounced, in mental health units, which is what has been happening. And we know from those spot checks that the assurance is there that Tywel Van is not being repeated across the rest of Wales. As I've said, that is of no comfort to the families. The families will want to know what is going to be done, who is going to be held responsible, and the LHB must make sure that they are transparent in terms of ensuring that they indicate where responsibility lies and that those who shoulder that responsibility understand that they have let people down.
Now call the Leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch yn fawr. First Minister, last month's UK general election saw the different countries vote for different parties. Now this weekend we've heard that the so-called British Bill of Rights could be confined just to England. Now Scotland look to be able to resist the abolition of the Human Rights Act. As Wales doesn't have its own legal jurisdiction, we could face a situation of for Wales, see England when it comes to human rights legislation. Do you agree that Wales must now have its own legal jurisdiction, and will you put this point to the Secretary of State for Wales at the earliest opportunity?
Well, she will know that I'm in favour, certainly in the medium term, of Wales becoming a separate jurisdiction. I think I first suggested it some years ago now. She does make an important point about the Human Rights Act. First of all, if the Human Rights Act is abolished, it changes the Constitution of Wales. And that cannot be done without the approval, at least, of this institution, to my mind. Secondly, of course, there is legislation, the Social Services Act is one example of it, where the Human Rights Act is specifically mentioned. Now, what happens if the Human Rights Act goes? What happens to that legislation? If it was Westminster legislation, of course, the legislation would be amended as new legislation is introduced, but it's never been considered before. It means when you have separate institutions. So my view is quite clear. I mean, when I met the group that were looking to take forward a British Bill of Rights some years ago, it was quite clear to me they had no idea what they wanted to do. They had no conception of devolution, what it meant. They hadn't considered the effect on Northern Ireland, particularly of the peace agreement, the Good Friday peace agreement. There were many, many unanswered questions. And so far, all I've seen from the UK government is a fudge in terms of how they now propose to take this forward. We all wait and see. It was kicked into the long grass at the, in the Queen's speech, but it's absolutely clear to me that it would be wholly wrong in principle for the Constitution of Wales to be changed without the approval of this, our national institution.
Thank you, First Minister, and I would agree with your sentiment there, and you've outlined plenty of problems and issues. The problem is, though, that things are moving far too slowly. The situation is evolving far too slowly. Other parts of the UK are moving rapidly. Scotland has got a very clear pro-European vision of where it wants to go. In England, the Conservatives are trying to redefine their human rights as something that isn't dependent upon Europe. Can you tell us what is your strategy? What will you be saying to the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State for Wales, others in the other devolved administrations on resolving the issues that you've outlined so eloquently about the Human Rights Act in particular?
Hands off human rights in Wales. I see nothing wrong with the Human Rights Act. I do deplore the suggestion that somehow the Human Rights Act has been some kind of way of preventing dangerous criminals from being deported. Using extreme examples for legislation that has benefited people immensely is ridiculous. And there are two issues here. Firstly, the issue of human rights. What is wrong with the Human Rights Act is the first question I'd ask. I've not had an answer to that from the UK government. What does it mean in terms of the UK being a co-signatory of the European Convention on Human Rights, which the UK drafted effectively? And if the UK is no longer to be a signatory, like Belarus, of the European Convention of Human Rights, what does that mean for our membership of the European Union? There's strong evidence to suggest you cannot be a member of the EU unless you are a signatory of the European Convention. There's that issue. And then, of course, the issue of what it means for Wales. The Human Rights Act was embedded in our Constitution in 1999 and since. To change it unilaterally, without the consent of this institution, is wrong.
You've pointed out important links between human rights legislation and our membership of the European Union, and there is common ground between us on that question. We would both agree that remaining within the EU is in Wales's best interests. Human rights, peace, agricultural policy, structural funds are some ways in which we benefit, across, of course, with access to the European single market as well. Now, I've already noted today how the Westminster elections produced politically diverse countries within the UK. My hope is that very much that all parts of the UK will vote to remain in the EU, but I wouldn't presume that Wales would vote differently to England or to Scotland, but we must make provision just in case that does happen. So would you agree with me that we should insist that the EU referendum should be subject to a double majority, where withdrawal would need a majority of UK votes in each of the nations or constituent countries? We are a multinational state, and that point does deserve to be recognised. Now, you have said previously that this is something that's worth considering. So will you be prepared to announce today that you commit to supporting a double majority rule in the EU referendum?
I think legally that's difficult, but morally, I think it's absolutely correct. I don't think the UK would survive if the UK were to leave the EU on the basis of votes from one or two of the constituent nations of the EU. I don't think that Scotland would remain part of the UK if the UK was no longer a member of the EU. I think it would create immense constitutional difficulties for Wales as well, none of which are easy to resolve. I do not think it would be in the interest of the UK to leave the European Union if it was done without a majority in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Legally difficult. Morally, I think that's absolutely right because of the effect it would have on the different nations. And I took great notice of what the Prime Minister said, that the UK is a family of 4 nations. And it's important in those circumstances that a family can agree on the way forward.
And now the leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats, Kirsty Williams.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. First Minister, the shocking report into the Towel Van unit at Glencloyd Hospital revealed institutional abuse. Families started making complaints as early as 2012. Why was not that abuse detected sooner or concerns acted upon?
Well, it's difficult to answer a question about should something have been done earlier. In an ideal world, this abuse would never have happened at all. There is a legitimate question about how then the issue is handled. When the concerns came to the when a pattern of concerns came to the notice of the local health board, there was an independent report. They commissioned that, and of course they will need to act on that report. And I said before, it's absolutely crucial that those who are responsible in the LHB shoulder that responsibility. As government, we have taken steps to ensure through the spot checks that we can get assurance this is not a pattern across Wales. The evidence from those spot checks suggests that it isn't a pattern across Wales. That does provide us with that assurance. But again, the LHB have to make sure that what has happened in Towel Van is dealt with properly and openly.
First Minister, in November 2013, I asked you to assure me that if there was a care scandal happening in Wales, you would have robust enough procedures in place to detect it and stop it. You told me then, we of course monitor what the health boards are doing, and the Minister does that on a day-to-day basis. First Minister, those complaints had already been raised and had already been ignored by Betsy Cadwallader Trust at that stage. Either you and the Minister don't monitor the health boards, or the way in which you monitor the health boards is failing. Which is it?
I think she raised an important point with the Health Inspectorate. I know this is an issue that is important to her. And the future of the Health Inspectorate, the question being, is it sufficiently independent of government? We would hope that it is, of course. The last thing we'd want is for an inspector to tell us what it thinks we want to hear, not what we need to hear. Now, of course, we did commission a report from Ruth Marks in terms of what the future should be. There will be a green paper that will look at the Health Inspectorate, its structure, and whether, of course, it should be merged so we have a joint health and social services or health and social care inspectorate. And as part of that process, of course, we want to make sure that we have as robust a system as possible for inspection. So, of course, ministers are made aware of what is happening via the most robust system possible.
You're right, First Minister. The role and functions of HIW are of extreme importance to me. And unfortunately, we have before us another report where they seem to have been found wanting. And I do appreciate the apology that they have given with regards to their actions in this particular case. But would you now agree that the Green Paper needs to move more quickly? We need to move immediately to a situation where we have a stand-alone inspectorate, completely independent of your or anybody else's government, so that we can all be assured, especially the patients and the staff that work within the NHS, that the final backstop of quality and assurance in the NHS, the Welsh NHS, is fit for purpose and is resourced and managed appropriately.
Well, we would hope, of course, that the inspectorate is independent enough now. But if the evidence shows that there is a need to strengthen that independence, then clearly it's in the interest not just of the public, but in terms of the government as well, because we need to make sure that we have an inspectorate, as we do in other walks of public policy, other areas of public policy, that is robust, independent, and tells us what we need to hear, not what we want to hear. We take into account, of course, what has happened at Tawel Van, and recognise that it's important to make sure that the Health Inspectorate, as with every other inspectorate, commands public support and public respect. And we bear that very much in mind as we consider now how the Green Paper moves forward.
Question 3, Mohammed Askar.
The Presiding Officer, what action will the Welsh Government take into 2015 to improve services for diabetes sufferers in Wales, please?
Well, we've shown an improvement in diabetes services and outcomes across a range of indicators, and we're accelerating this with an extra investment of £1 million a year to support the implementation of the Diabetes Delivery Plan.
Thank you, First Minister. A report last year said there was strong evidence that diabetes specialist nurses, they can help NHS in 2 areas. One is they can save money for NHS, helping to reduce the length of time people with diabetes to stay in hospital. And secondly, to help to reduce the risk of health complication in the long term for the people for the diabetes. What study has the Welsh Government has made into the cost benefit to the NHS of increasing the number of diabetes specialist nurses in Wales?
Well, the Chief Nursing Officer led an audit last year into diabetes specialist nurse staffing levels in response to the recommendations of the Health and Social Care Committee's inquiry. We are working through the findings of this audit, and those findings will be published in the next few months. The Diabetes Implementation Group, supported by the National Clinical Lead, will then consider the appropriate actions from this audit.
Christine Chapman.
Thank you. First Minister, January's annual report notes both mortality and morbidity related to diabetes are increased by socio-economic deprivation. However, the report also highlights the positive measures CumTAF Local Health Board is taking to support children and young people with diabetes, such as early recognition and ensuring supportive school environments. Does the First Minister agree with me that these will lead to long-term benefits in treating diabetes, but how else can we support those poorer communities, including my constituency of Cynon Valley, to tackle the inequality-related effects of diabetes in the meantime?
Quite so. I mean, first of all, of course, there's the issue of differentiating between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. With type 2 diabetes, lifestyle, of course, plays that important factor. And we know that type 2 diabetes is linked to lifestyles that are less than healthy. Can I say I applaud the approach of CumTAF and the other health boards who are working with their partners in public health, in local government and the third sector to intervene early to help people to live healthier lifestyles now so they're not at risk of developing type 2 diabetes in the future. And that, of course, will help to prevent the progression of the disease as well amongst those who have been diagnosed with it. But we know with type 2 diabetes that prevention is a particularly important factor in terms of ensuring that fewer and fewer people do end up being diagnosed with the disease. There are some diseases, of course, where nothing can be done in terms of reducing risk. Some cancers fall into that category, but type 2 diabetes is an example of where lifestyle choices do make a real difference in terms of the likelihood of being diagnosed with the disease in the future.
William Powell.
First Minister, a constituent recently contacted me as having been referred by his GP to the diabetes clinic of Betsy Cadwallader University Health Board. He was subsequently discharged due to the board's, and I quote direct from the correspondence, inability to review patients in a timely manner because of ongoing difficulties to recruit to a long-standing vacant consultant post. First Minister, what can the Welsh Government do to ensure that health boards across Wales can more effectively recruit to these specialist posts, particularly in deep rural areas such as Gwynedd?
Well, if the member provides me with that information, I will, of course, investigate the matter for him. In terms of the diabetes delivery plan, that is being driven forward by Adam Cairns, who's the Chief Executive of the Cardiff and Vale Health Board. And as part of that diabetes delivery plan, for example, we've established an all-Wales paediatric diabetes network. We know that the management of paediatric diabetes is improving, and of course we've had the appointment of a national clinical lead for diabetes. So it's important, of course, that there is the overarching framework to deal with diabetes, and it's important that local health boards have the right level of medical skill in place in order to provide a service that people would expect. But if he provides me with information, of course, I will look at it for him.
Question 4, William Graham.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister outline the Welsh Government's input into the Velathon Wales cycle event?
Yes, we provided financial assistance to support the preparation and staging of Velathon Wales, and officials have been working with the event organisers and local authority partners to maximise the benefits of hosting the event.
I'm grateful to the First Minister for his reply. My reason for raising this matter this afternoon is that a number of businesses in my region, particularly those in Peterson and St Brian's Wenclwg, are having enormous disruption on that day, and unfortunately the organisers have not engaged with those people to tell them well in advance that with the days that would happen, the roads that would be closed. They've had to rely on public announcements. In future, First Minister, could you make sure your officials engage with the organisers to make sure the businesses are not disrupted?
Well, there are concerns. The member is right about the organisers' communications strategy in terms of the event. He is right to say that many businesses and indeed residents feel that they're not fully familiar with what the event will mean for Cardiff. It's not primarily, of course, an issue for the Welsh Government in terms of organising the event. Nevertheless, we have been coordinating daily discussions with the organisers, with the delivery partners, with the local authorities, the police and the health boards, and those discussions are moving forward. Things, I think, should have been done a lot earlier in terms of the organisation's communication, but nevertheless, we're confident now that having facilitated the round-the-table discussions, that we will be in a position where the public will be informed as quickly as possible of what the consequences of the event are.
Bryn Appiol.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm sure that every one of us who takes an interest in cycling looks forward to the Velathon, and I certainly wish the event well. It's being organised, of course, by an international company, but what efforts can the government make to ensure that events companies from Wales have the opportunity to play their part in staging these sorts of events in future, in order to ensure that the economic benefits that accrue from organising these events, not only from staging them, is actually felt here in Wales?
Well, of course, we do support numerous events, some more so than others, and a number of those are events that have grown from the community and have brought great benefit to those communities, and not just to those people working in hotels, but people working in tourism more generally. And so when we talk about support for major events, many of those events are ones that have grown from the local community.
Simon.
Question 5, Simon Thomas. Thank you, Presiding Officer. What legal advice has the First Minister commissioned on the impact that repealing or revising the Human Rights Act of 1998 will have on devolution in Wales?
Well, I cannot say whether we've received legal advice or not. I'm sure the member will understand fully my feelings on this.
Thank you, First Minister. And I listened to your responses to the Leader Reply Cymru a little earlier, and I'm pleased that you stated clearly that this place, this Assembly, must consent to any change in the Human Rights Act as it does impact upon our Constitution, which established this Assembly. There is a difference of legal opinion on this issue, however. Michael Gove clearly thinks that they can proceed on an England and Wales basis, ignoring Scotland and Northern Ireland. Dominic Reeve, as the former Attorney General, has stated clearly that he is of the view that there is a need for the assent of this place to amend or reform the Human Rights Act. So I would ask once again whether you could commission legal advice, and secondly, in your view as First Minister, is this an issue of devolution under the Government of Wales Act 2006 that could be referred to the Supreme Court?
Well, as regards your second point, that's something to be considered, but as regards your first point, that there should be consent from this institution, and of course we would have to receive a view on the view of this national institution as what should happen to the Constitution of Wales, and that's only right in both senses.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Ensure that the effect on existing Welsh legislation, such as the Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act, is considered during the consultation on the Human Rights Act proposed in the Queen's speech?
Well, the simple answer is it's never happened before. And there's no clear answer on this. What would happen, of course, if Westminster were to repeal a Westminster Act, any reference to that act in other legislation would be repealed at the same time. What we're talking about here is legislation where an act that will be repealed by Westminster is contained in the act of a devolved legislature and therefore wouldn't be repealed by Westminster at the same time. It's a mess that has no clear answer. That said, of course, where there are references to UN conventions in the Social Services Act, they would remain because they don't form part of the Human Rights Act and they would continue to apply. But there are some serious concerns about what would happen to Welsh legislation where there's reference to the Human Rights Act, where that act no longer exists, and what that means for legislation. Again, I don't think this has been taken forward or thought of at all in any depth by the UK government.
Question 6, Kirsty Williams.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister make a statement on the commissioning of social care services for the people of Brecon and Radnorshire by Powys County Council?
Well, of course, the commissioning is a statutory responsibility for local authorities. There have been issues with domiciliary care provision in Powys, and I know the Minister's had a number of meetings with Powys County Council to ensure that this is effectively managed.
Issues would be an understatement, First Minister. Despite repeated warnings by myself and subcontractors that they were not being paid by the main contractor who had been commissioned by Powys County Council, Powys County Council said there was no evidence of such practice. It now transpires from the liquidator's reports that actually Powys County Council were lending taxpayers' money to that company to pay their HMRC bill and were in the process of delivering another loan to that company for their subcontractors to be paid when that company became bankrupt. Will you, First Minister, ask your officials to look into the practices of Powys County Council, whether it is legal for them to use taxpayers' money to lend to companies for whom they've already paid for a service, and ensure that the commissioning arrangements in Powys going forward are strong and robust to ensure decent services for my constituents and decent value to local taxpayers?
Well, ultimately, of course, it is a matter for Powys to justify. Yes, of course, ministers have a role, but Powys, if Powys are doing that, they've got to have to justify that to their auditors, particularly in terms of whether that is lawful or not. I make no comment on whether it's lawful or not. It's about for the auditors to discover. But there is a responsibility on local authorities to deliver a level of care of social services that the public would expect. I wait to see what the outcome of the audit process is in terms of Powys, and I'll certainly look at this issue myself.
Russell George.
Last year, a report by the Care and Social Services Inspectorate found that elderly and vulnerable people were seriously let down, and that service users experienced physical injury and significant harm in Powys. What has the Welsh Government done to ensure that the errors made in Powys are not replicated in other areas of Wales?
Well, he's the Powys County Councillor.
I'm asking you about
at
other
the end of the
areas
day,
of Wales.
in his role as a county
Answer the
councillor, he
question.
should ask the county council.
Answer the question.
Someone coming here and asking a question of the county council, he's not doing it in County Hall. But that's what happens when you get dual mandate, I suppose. But I mean, that is for him to explain whether he's asking those questions in Powys County Hall in Llandrindod, Wells. He has the answer that I've given to the leader of the Liberal Democrats on this. It is for Powys County Council to justify what they're doing to their auditors and for their county councillors to hold them accountable.
Joyce Watson.
Diolch, Dipro Llywydd. Minister, we have heard in the Chamber this morning that there is huge dissatisfaction with the services that have been commissioned in Powys. Could I ask you, Minister, that you might at least have a conversation with Powys County Councillor that outline the need to provide good terms of service, that is proper pay and proper conditions, that in turn might actually deliver good levels of care to those people who desperately need it. And that is, I think, where the conversation really needs to be brought back.
I entirely agree with what the member has said in terms of delivery of services to the public. I can say the Minister has had 2 meetings with the Council over the last few months to discuss the handling of and to seek assurance about the continuity and quality of domiciliary care services. Officials have been receiving weekly updates from the Director of Social Services in Powys and the Inspectorate, and they have been monitoring the situation. What I don't know is whether they're aware of what the Leader of the Liberal Democrats has said, but I'll make sure that they are.
Simon Thomas.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Of course, one of the weaknesses of a weak and poorly led authority was recognised in the Williams Commission, which suggested that social services in Powys and the Health Board should actually come together and deliver these kind of services, perhaps with an eye to improvements in the future. Is that still the intention of the Welsh Government?
This is an issue that we're still considering. The member will know that there is not agreement across this chamber in terms of what the future map of local government should look like. There is general agreement that needs to be changed, and that much is true. We are considering at the moment what we should put forward in terms of a discussion map as far as Wales is concerned. I know other parties will seek to do the same at the election. Now, we all know there are difficulties in local authorities, and it will be incumbent on those who are here in this chamber after the 2016 to, in my mind, to come to a conclusion that provides a sustainable and lasting local government settlement for Wales.
Question 7, Peter Black.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister make a statement on his administration's pledge to increase school funding by 1% above the change in the Assembly's block grant?
Yes, we've made that commitment, and over the current spending review period, we've provided an additional £106 million for schools as a result.
Well, thank you for that answer, First Minister. You will know, of course, that if you are monitoring the way that schools, the funding that schools are receiving, that many local authorities are actually making real-term cuts in the money available to them. And in my region in particular, there are cuts of 5% in some school fundings and other local and more in other local authorities. Can I ask you what monitoring you are doing of this and how you're holding local authorities to account for the pledge that you've made on their behalf?
We do monitor what local authorities do in terms of the money. The monitoring data received for the period from 2014 to 15, the last financial year, shows that all local authorities have met or exceeded the 1% protection commitment. We keep a very close eye indeed on the commitment. It was a main commitment for us as a party in 2011, and we intend to make sure that all local authorities deliver on it.
Question 8, Rheinap Llawn.
Question 8, Rheinap Llawn. Will the First Minister make a statement on care for elderly mentally infirm people in North Wales?
We, of course, expect that everybody in North Wales should receive the proper standard of care, and we expect that every partner implementing that care or delivering that care should ensure that that happens.
The First Minister will know that there are currently delays in the decision by the Betsy Cadwaladr Health Board and Anglesey Council to cease commissioning EMI beds in the Santasilio home after an request was made for a court to make a decision on the issue, and in that regard I can't very easily ask the First Minister to make a comment on that home or on that decision. But does the First Minister agree with me that this has highlighted broader problems, namely a shortage of capacity in North West Wales specifically and a shortage of qualified staff to provide care for the most vulnerable elderly patients, and how does the government intend to respond to that crisis?
Well, I understand the situation in Sant Tasilio, and it doesn't appear to be a North Wales or Wales-wide problem, but I know it's a problem on the island. A number of reviews have taken place, and I understand that the local authority is working with the health board and also with the families and those residents of the home itself to ensure that healthcare is delivered ultimately. But it's important that a solution is found as soon as possible to give an assurance not just to those people working there, but those people residing there and their families.
David Ellis-Thomas.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. What issues does the First Minister intend to raise at the next Joint Ministerial Committee meeting?
A number of matters regarding the economy, jobs and, of course, the Constitution.
I thank the First Minister. Will he seek assurances from the UK Prime Minister that he will implement the recommendations in Powers for a purpose, specifically on this institution, the Assembly itself, ensuring that the arrangements for full legislative competence and responsibility for Assembly elections comes to this Assembly in the 4th Assembly.
Well, I've made this point to the Secretary of State, and to be fair to him, he's not opposed to the idea at all. What he said is that it's important that they move forward now with what they call the St David's Day agreement, but what I would call the St David's Day process. And what's important is that we see something happening. Although we have a timetable, we don't have the details. Everybody is agreed that there should be reserved model on the powers issue, but we must ensure that we understand the detail on what should be reserved, as they call it in Westminster, and what should be here in Wales in the future. And I will keep a very close eye on that. I wouldn't be in favour of anything which actually diminishes the current powers that we hold, and we would hope that we'll be able to work through these matters by the autumn.
Prif Weinidog.
Thank you, First Minister.
Item 2 is the business statement.